Sheriff Jake Tolliver staggered as a rifle butt slammed into his ribs. Still, he stayed planted in front of the trembling woman behind him. Nearly 70 ranch hands pressed closer through the pre-dawn gloom. The entire cattle crew was hungry for vengeance. Jake's hand hovered near his holstered revolver, but he hesitated. Drawing would turn this standoff into a massacre. Time was bleeding away before sunrise. A noose already swung from the lone cottonwood tree behind them. One false move, and Nora would hang. How in thunder did it come to this? 12 hours earlier. Cattle camp outside Red Mesa. Sheriff Jake Tolliver crouched by the chuck wagon at dusk, polishing his battered pocket watch. A soft breeze rattled the tin cups on the wagon and carried the aroma of coffee through the camp. Moments ago, they'd held a wedding under the cottonwood. Now the groom lay dead in the dirt, skin turning blue. Nora, the bride, knelt over her husband's body, pressing her palms to his chest. Tears left muddy tracks on her cheeks. She had tried every healing trick, but it was too late. Angry whispers hissed from the crowd. Witch. One cowpoke snatched up a little vial of herbs Nora had dropped. This devilry killed him, he snarled, hurling it to the ground. The circle of men tightened. Reverend Samuel Tate lifted his Bible. Sons, let the Lord judge, he pleaded, but the mob drowned him out. Hank Dobbs shoved forward, an impromptu noose of rope coiled in his fist. Two cowboys seized Nora and hauled her up from her husband's body. She cried out, stumbling as they dragged her away. Jake's gut clenched. He shoved his way between Nora and the mob. Enough, Jake barked. The men faltered. We're not doing this, he growled. This girl tried to help. Hank's eyes narrowed into slits. Step aside, Tolliver. That woman's cursed. She hangs by sunrise. Around him, men shouted in drunken agreement and pressed closer, itching for blood. Jake raised a steady hand, keeping his other near his colt. You'll give me till dawn. If she's guilty, I'll see justice done myself. For a moment, only the crackle of the campfire and Nora's quiet sobs broke the silence. Then Hank spat in the dirt and motioned his men to stand down. A grudging murmur rolled through the crowd. Jake let out the breath he'd been holding. He pulled Nora to his side. Her slender frame shook like a leaf. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Dawn was 12 hours away, and every ticking minute felt like a burning fuse. Would this fragile peace hold till sunrise? Hit subscribe to join our posse for more Wild West adventures. Jake led Nora and Reverend Tate away from the campfires and into the darkness. Deputy Ben Miller followed, rifle in hand. The night wind carried the damp smell of coming rain. Nora stumbled on an exposed root. Jake caught her arm, steadying her. She had been silent, but now her voice trembled. Maybe I should just give myself up, she whispered. Jake halted and faced her. In the faint moonlight, her face was ashen. No, ma'am, he said firm. We're not handing you over to any mob. Her eyes brimmed. They think I cursed Luke. What if they're right? She choked out. Everyone I love gets hurt. Reverend Tate squeezed her shoulder. This was an accident, not your doing, he said gently. Superstition is just fear talking. Ahead, Ben hissed a warning. A lone rider with a lantern was coming up the slope behind them. Jake rushed Nora and Tate behind a boulder and crouched with Ben. The young cowhand rode closer, shotgun in hand, shouting slurred curses about a witch into the dark. Jake gave a silent signal. Ben stood and barked, "That's far enough." The rider's horse reared, and the startled cowboy let off a wild blast from his shotgun. In an instant, Jake lunged. He grabbed the rider's boot and dragged him off the saddle. The lantern crashed, plunging the hill into darkness. By the time the dazed cowboy realized what happened, Jake had his revolver pressed to the man's chest, and Ben had kicked the shotgun away. Jake smelled whiskey on the cowboy's breath. "Go back to camp," Jake growled coldly. "One warning, next time, I won't be so gentle." The wide-eyed young man scrambled to his feet and stumbled downhill into the rain without another word. His spooked horse bolted into the night. Ben wiped water from his face. "They'll be back with more," he said grimly. He glanced at the royalty black sky. "And we've still got hours till dawn." Jake holstered his Colt and hurried Nora and Tate toward the line shack as fat raindrops began to fall. "Next time they won't come one by one," he muttered. "Inside, quick! We'll hold out till sunrise." A jagged fork of lightning split the sky, lighting the ridge in stark white. Nora flinched, and Jake threw his arm around her shoulders. Thunder crashed overhead as they reached the ramshackle hut, and all four ducked inside. Jake shoved the door shut against the gale. By the flicker of Ben's match lighting a lamp, their faces gleamed with rain. Nora stared at the quivering door. Outside, the storm howled, and below, dozens of angry cowboys gathered for a final assault. Could this flimsy shelter withstand the fury of both nature and vengeful men until dawn? Rain pounded the tin roof of the line shack as the storm reached its fury. Inside the cramped hut, Jake and his companions caught their breath in flickering lamplight. Water dripped through a dozen leaky holes, and the air reeked of damp wood and gunpowder. Nora sat on an upturned crate, shivering under the Reverend's dry coat. Jake peered through a gap in the plank wall at the dark hillside. Lightning flashed, revealing moving shapes circling below. Reverend Tate offered a quiet prayer, but Jake's mind churned. Nora broke the silence, her voice small. "Sheriff, why are you risking all this for me?" She hugged the coat tighter around herself. "You barely know me." Jake turned from the wall. In the lamplight, Nora's eyes searched his. He cleared his throat. "Because it's the right thing," he said slowly. "Years ago, I wasn't a good man. I ran with a bad crowd, hurt people who didn't deserve it." He absently thumbed the dented lid of his pocket watch, recalling the blood on his hands. "One night, I nearly killed an innocent man. My mentor, the sheriff before me, stopped me, died doing it. His last breath, he made me swear to never stray to the wrong side of the law again." Jake glanced at the battered watch in his palm, its steady ticking a constant reminder of that vow. "I kept that promise, and I won't break it now by letting an innocent girl hang." Nora's eyes glistened. She reached out and gently closed Jake's hand around the watch. "You're not the man you were," she whispered. "Thank you." Suddenly, a booming voice bellowed over the storm outside. "Jake Tolliver! Sunup's nearly here!" came Hank's raw shout. "Send out the witch, or we're coming in shooting." Nora flinched, and Tate tightened a protective arm around her. Jake blew out a breath and stood, resolve hardening in his eyes. A heavy thud rattled the door, someone testing the barricade. Ben braced his shoulder against the buckling wood. Thunder crashed again, nearly drowning out Hank's final snarl. "Time's up." Wood began to crack under the onslaught of fists and boots. Jake cocked his rifle. How long could the frail door hold against 70 enraged men? The barricade exploded inward under a barrage of boots and shoulders. Hank Dobbs burst through the shattered door first, pistol drawn and eyes wild. Behind him, rain-soaked cowboys poured into the shack, their torches spitting embers despite the downpour. A gunshot cracked. Ben's rifle kicked against his shoulder, and a charging ranch hand spun to the floor with a cry. The small room erupted in chaos of muzzle flashes and flying fists. Wood splintered, and oil lamplight swung crazily. Hank charged at Jake like a maddened bull. They crashed through a shelf, scattering tins and tools. Jake hit the ground hard, pain jolting his ribs where he'd been kicked earlier. Hank loomed over him, teeth bared in a furious grin. "End of the line, Sheriff," he snarled, cocking his revolver down at Jake's chest. Before Hank could fire, a shotgun blast boomed from the corner. Reverend Tate stood there trembling but determined, his smoking scattergun in hand. Hank staggered back, buckshot tearing into his side. The brutish foreman roared in pain and rounded on the preacher. With a curse, he raised his pistol and squeezed the trigger. Tate jerked as the bullet struck him. The old reverend collapsed against the wall, a crimson stain blossoming on his shoulder. "No!" Jake shouted, fury igniting in his chest. He ripped his gun from its holster. Hank barely had time to blink. Jake's shot cracked through the dim hut, catching Hank high in the chest and sending him tumbling out through the gaping doorway into the storm. The big man hit the mud outside and lay still, rain pooling in the wound where Jake's bullet hit home. Seeing their leader fall, the remaining cowboys hesitated. One by one, they stumbled back out into the rain, dragging wounded friends and shouting in retreat. In seconds, the shack emptied of all but Jake's group. The sudden silence was broken only by the drumming rain and Reverend Tate's ragged breathing. The air inside reeked of gunpowder and fear. Jake kicked aside debris and knelt by the preacher's side. Tate was alive, grimacing through the pain as he clutched his bleeding shoulder. Nora hurried to tear a strip from her skirt, helping Jake bind the wound with shaking hands. The Reverend managed a faint, reassuring nod. Outside, the first dull glow of sunrise crept into the stormy sky. They had survived the night. Ben exhaled in relief and lowered his rifle. Jake holstered his smoking Colt with a trembling hand. It was over, or so he thought. A single gunshot cracked from outside, its bullet punching through the wall just inches from Jake's head. Everyone froze. Jake's heart lurched. The fight wasn't finished. He grabbed his rifle and stepped back to the doorway, peering out into the gray dawn. A lone figure stood amid the rain and carnage of the camp. Jake recognized him. Jed Sutherland, dead Luke's own brother. Jed's face was twisted with grief and rage, and he leveled a long rifle straight at the shack. "You killed my brother," Jed screamed hoarsely, shifting his aim toward Nora's silhouette inside. That witch should have died instead. Jake's stomach dropped. Jed was soaked, shaking, clearly half mad with loss, and his finger was tightening on the trigger. Jake had seconds to act. He shouted, "Jed, don't!" Fumbling inside his vest, he found his pocket watch shattered. The bullet had struck it dead center, freezing its hands forever. Across the yard, Jed cursed in disbelief and began to reload with shaking hands. Ben fired without hesitation. The shot ripped the rifle from Jed's grip and sent him crumpling into the mud, howling in pain. Jake pushed himself upright, the ruined watch clutched in his fist. He staggered out into the drizzle where Jed writhed, unarmed and wounded. In the growing light of dawn, Jake loomed over the fallen man. Jed glared up defiantly. "Go on," Jed hissed through his teeth. "Do it. She should have died instead of Luke." His voice broke, all fury spent. Nora stood behind Jake now, one hand pressed over her mouth. Only the rain broke the silence. Jake's revolver hung heavy in his hand. He looked at Jed, another broken soul made by this night of bloodshed, and felt the weight of his vow press on him. Slowly, Jake uncocked the hammer and lowered his gun. "No," he muttered, "it ends here." Jed closed his eyes and slumped back, defeated. Ben rushed forward with rope to bind Jed. Jake turned to Nora's side. She was staring at the dented watch in Jake's hand, the keepsake that had caught a bullet. Cradling the broken timepiece, Jake managed to shake and smile. Dawn's early light revealed a yard littered with spent shells, but the lynch mob had vanished like a bad dream. Nora stepped out of the shack into the hazy sunrise. She was alive, and they had won, but at what cost? As the morning sun broke through the clouds, Jake and Nora surveyed the silent camp. The worst was over, but superstition still cast a long shadow. Mercy had won today, yet some battles would echo far beyond dawn. Subscribe for more Wild West adventures.